we finally have access to the Guren MK-2, a brand new Kallen and a new Jeremiah. But should you summon any of these pilots, or should you wait for the Knights of the Round event? Well, in this video, I'm going to answer that question, so let's get to it. Okay, so here is the banner for the new Jeremiah. Let me go click on him and let's go through his stats. So Jeremiah is an assault pilot. I know it says striker, but every time I hear the word striker, all I can think is
striker. Striker, 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 striker! Striker!
Anyways, he's got pretty high health, low cost. Well, he is a assault pilot, so I would imagine low cost would be part of the package deal. But still, he's got low cost. His attack power is 716.4%, which is still one of the highest attacks for any assault pilot in the game. That includes the Japanese version, which only has 2 other pilots that have more attack than him. But still, that's very impressive. So it gives Jeremiah some staying power down the line. Now let's go back to going over his stats and abilities. Okay, so his first ability is called This Is My Duel, which is appropriate because that's what he says in episode 10, I believe, of season 1. So it says here, increases attack power by 35% for 17.5 seconds and increases deployment cost, or points, whatever term you want to use, by 4 every time this pilot defeats an enemy. And the second effect is increases the speed that this unit's Nightmare Frame skill gauge fills up by 52.5% during combat. I had the up part. I don't like the way this sentence is worded, but still that's a pretty good effect and kind of standard when compared to other Nightmare Frame pilots. Here are my thoughts on this new Jeremiah. On the surface, he seems like a really powerful pilot because he has low cost, high melee attack, and increases his own attack power, plus increases your cost every time he destroys a Nightmare Frame pilot, which is similar to Bedtime Lelouch, although Bedtime Lelouch can use a Nightmare Frame with a ranged weapon, and this Jeremiah simply cannot, which means that Bedtime Lelouch has a better chance of having this effect resolved more frequently than Jeremiah. Now in the future, after the first year anniversary boost, this Jeremiah will become significantly better, and he will combo well with the Siegfried, which comes out towards the end of R1. So there's definitely a lot of reasons to consider using him down the road and investing time into him. Now, while there's a lot of upside with this character, there are some things about him that I'm not a big fan of. For example, while I think the deployment cost increase ability is great, it's not as good as the other Jeremiah, who simply increase your cost on deployment, and I don't think it's better than passive cost increasers who consistently increase your cost over a period of time. With this Jeremiah, you have to have a lot of enemies for that effect to come into play. If you do not, it will not be as effective. And what's even worse, if you do have a lot of enemies in play, it's possible they could overrun Jeremiah and kill him, because while he does have good stats as an assault pilot, that's all he is, an assault pilot. He's not an annihilator or a defensive pilot, so he could get overrun and destroyed, meaning you will not take full advantage of that cost increase ability. I would rather just use normal cost increasers than relying on something like this. And because of these durability issues, Jeremiah is probably better suited in a Lance Nightmare Frame to go behind a better attacker, despite having over 700 attack. To put it simply, Jeremiah is an assault pilot trying to be an annihilator and failing kind of at both. So I do like the hybrid elements to his pilot. I would prefer to just use a solid annihilator or a solid assault pilot than someone who's trying to be good at both and failing, to be honest, at both. He's a solid pilot. Just don't throw him in the battlefield expecting him to be like Kallen, Cornelia, or Uribe, because he just isn't. Oh, and one more thing you should know. Because the effect occurs every time you kill a Nightmare Frame pilot, if you use him, let's say with the Guren or the Lancelot, where it takes out several enemies at one time, that'll still only count as once. So that cost increase and that attack power increase will only happen once. So keep that in mind. Killing a bunch of enemies at one time will still only count as one event and will not stack in the way you might think it would, which kinda sucks, but if it did, that'd be also really broken. Now let's move on to the new Kallen and the Guren MK-2. Okay, here's her page. Let's click on her and read her effects. She is a rank 4 Annihilator pilot with really solid health and high defense. She's kind of like a Rook and an Annihilator in one single package. Let's go on to her effects. So her first one is don't take the Guren lightly. 3 seconds after placement, and every 20 seconds thereafter, increase the number of enemies this unit can hit with normal attacks by 1 for 20 seconds, and increases its block count by 1. And the other effect is like Jeremiah's, where it increases the speed at which the skill gauge increases by 52.5% during combat. By the way, I'm pretty sure these numbers go up if you use the Guren MK-2 and boost your skill power to level 5. So here are my thoughts on this new Kallen. Just like Jeremiah, we have another example of a hybrid-like pilot where she's an annihilator and a defensive pilot all rolled up into one package. But the problem with her, just like Jeremiah, she's not particularly good at either one of those things, meaning there are other pilots in the game that are either better defenders or attackers, which you should use instead of this Kallen. For example, her attack power is 760, which is really low for a melee annihilator pilot. You have examples like Uribe and the Kallen that came before this one with attack power that is higher and they're easier to acquire. Sure, their other abilities may not be as good, although that's debatable, but they have more attack power, which is really important. And of course, Cornelia is way better than this Kallen in both her stats and abilities, which is really frustrating. While she does have high defense and high health, I wouldn't say it's good enough to replace the original Kallen or the defensive Kallen if you want someone to block. I know the idea here is that Kallen has high defense and relatively high attack power so she can block a lot of enemies and of course take them out, which would work in theory, but in harder stages, not so much. Another thing annoying about this Kallen is the fact that she doesn't boost her own attack power, instead just increases the number of attacks she does plus the number of blocks, which is great and it combos well with the Guren MK-2, but she seems too dependent on the Guren MK-2 to be fully utilized in battle. I don't like the fact that she can't boost her own attack power. I know that in the future other pilots in the game will help her out like Taizo or Asahina, but that's annoying because she can't stand alone in that regard. So if you use her in the Guren MK-2, it's a very deadly combination. If you don't use her in the Guren MK-2, she's not that great, unfortunately. On the plus side, she will get a nice boost during the first year anniversary where they boost her attack power and her health. Again, not to the standards I would like, but still pretty good. The health is actually pretty solid as it will combo well with the Gwen or other Nightmare frames like that, and of course it makes her a better tank. But the attack power is still not good enough, especially after 1 year into the game. Another thing to consider is that Lazy Witch C2 is basically almost a better version of this pilot because she also has high health, high attack, and has special abilities that relate to acting as a defensive pilot. So in a sense, if you have the defensive C2, she can replace this Kallen, which is kind of depressing, but that's how it is. On my Japanese account, I only use this Kallen if I'm really desperate for an attacker to combo well with the Guren MK-2. Otherwise, I just don't use her because again, her stats are just not good enough. When it comes down to it, you're probably only summoning from this banner just to get the Guren MK-2. This new Kallen will be good maybe after the first year anniversary. Right now though, if you have better options like Cornelia, Uribe, and the other Kallen, definitely use those instead. Now on my free account, I did get her as one of the free daily 10 summons that you can get, and I'll probably use her on my team, but that's because I don't have too many other options at the moment besides Uribe and the other Kallen. So in that respect, she could be useful, but even then I just don't know. To me, this Kallen is just not good enough, and there will be better pilots in the future that I think you should save your resources for and not use them on this new Kallen. But hey, if you got nothing else, she's a solid Annihilator pilot as long as you use her with the Guren MK-2 and ignore the fact that her attack power is kinda terrible. Now let's talk about her Nightmare frame, the Guren MK-2. Okay, I'm at the store, let's click on it and see what it does. Okay, the Guren MK-2 is a Nightmare frame with a melee weapon, and it has 260 defense, 240 attack, only attacks one enemy at a time. The special attacks 5 enemies within range, which is the same as a lance, at 4.5 times your attack power, and inflicts 8,000 damage on top of that. By the way, that's the first Nightmare frame that I know of that deals fixed damage after using its special ability. The Guren MK-2 is really solid. My only complaint about it is the fact that it has 240 attack, which is not too bad right now, but in the future, that's not going to be enough in certain cases. The special makes up for it, but 240 attack seems very little, especially when you consider that the Lancelot Massive Vibration Swords has 245 attack, and the game will release Nightmare Frames in the future that are definitely kinetically weaker than the Guren MK-2, but will have more attack power, which makes absolutely no sense like the Byakugan. I still don't know why that ever became a thing, but that's one of the most frustrating aspects of the Guren MK-2. Now, just like other Nightmare Frames in the game, it will get a nice boost after the first year anniversary, but that boost is a mere 5 extra attack points and 5 extra defensive points, which is kind of insulting. Now, I will say the defense of this Nightmare Frame is very good, and I think they decided to give it really high defense to make up for the low attack power, although I would have just preferred higher attack and lower defense, but whatever, that's what they did. Now, despite my issues, this is still one of the best Nightmare Frames in the game, even now in the Japanese version. It combos very well with any other Kallen. It's great with defensive pilots because it deals fixed damage, which means that even if the pilot has low attack power, you're still guaranteed to do a lot of damage anyways, which is really useful. And as I said earlier, this is probably the reason why you want to summon from the banner, because this Guren MK-2 is that good and will be good for a very long time. I just wish that attack power was higher though. Anyways, let's move on to the Suigetsu, which is the free Nightmare Frame you can get if you complete all the missions, which you should definitely do, by the way. Okay, so I'm in the store and let's go to the Suigetsu. It is also a Nightmare Frame with a melee weapon, cost 6, 215 attack, 215 defense, also only attacks one enemy. The special attacks 2 enemies within range, which is 1 less than the Guren MK-2, so not a lance. It does 4.5 times your attack power and also inflicts 8,000 damage on top of that. So this Suigetsu is a weaker version of the Guren MK-2, but as a free Nightmare Frame, I'm not going to complain because these abilities are quite solid. Now, 215 attack and 215 defense does seem kinda low, but consider that most Nightmare Frames in the game that have melee weapons are not that much stronger. The only exceptions are the Guren MK-2 and Guilfred's Gloucester. The rest of them either have less or slightly more attack power, so right now those stats are not too bad. The special is amazing even though it only attacks 2 enemies instead of 5 like the Guren MK-2. This Nightmare Frame will also combo really well with the main character once we get him/her in the half anniversary event. And just like the Guren MK-2, because this Nightmare Frame deals fixed damage, it combos well with defensive pilots with low attack power. And as I said before, it's free, so definitely go after it. Just like the Burai Diesel, which is not the best Nightmare Frame in the game, it was still free to acquire and very helpful for free-to-play players, and this Nightmare Frame is no different. Now to answer the main question, should you summon from this banner? Here's my recommendation. You get 10 free summons every day from the current banner. Go through those 5 days. Then, if you still haven't gone Kallen and the Guren MK-2, or this new Jeremiah if you want that pilot, then maybe consider a couple spins. But wait until you've done all 50 summons before you spend money on this banner, especially if you're a free-to-play player. Keep in mind, we're not too far away from the Knights of the Round event, which is going to give us 7 new Nightmare Frames, plus 7 new Nightmare Frame pilots, 6 of which will be on a banner, and that's definitely a better use of your resources. So unless you really need the Guren MK-2, which I can understand, I would seriously consider just saving your resources for that banner. And that banner is still one of the best in the game, as someone who's been playing the Japanese version now for what, a year and a half or so, which is pretty crazy. If this is your first time playing Lost Stories, meaning that this is your first banner, then you probably have some questions about how the game works. So I got a video on 10 tips for beginners and a thorough guide on how the game works. Go check out those videos right now.